All right, last short video in this little chunk. Talk about the autonomic function. So really, the autonomic nervous system has a lot of different components, and it is kind of split up here and there throughout the section where it's relevant. This little chunk right here is just going to give you kind of the key points, the overall main ideas about the autonomic nervous system. All right. So we split the autonomic nervous system into two divisions: sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is going to be our fight or flight. This is mobilizing the energy, kicking up our blood sugar levels, prepping us to do activity. Parasympathetic, this is our rest and digest. This is for conservation of energy and sort of energy processing. Okay. The sympathetic nervous system is also known as the thoracolumbar nervous system or thoracolumbar area because of where it's located. It is between T1 and L2 is where the sympathetic nervous system is located, specifically in the lateral horns of the spinal cord. All of those are potential test questions talking about where the sympathetic nervous system is located. It can be lateral horns of the spinal cord, the thoracolumbar, T1 to L2. Any of those are acceptable answers for where the sympathetic nervous system is located. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, this is also known as the craniosacral nervous system. It holds several of our cranial nerves, specifically 3, 7, 9, and 10. And then also the very bottom plexus, the S2 to S4. So it's the brainstem and then the sacral spinal cord. We will talk more in other sections about those specific cranial nerves. We can talk about them in the general anatomy section a little bit more. Those are the ones that they really like to test on, specifically cranial nerve 10, that vagus nerve. Love to have questions about the vagus nerve because of its overarching role in the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. We will also typically get a couple of questions about preganglionic versus postganglionic neurons. First off, a ganglion is a bundle, a grouping of the synapses. So where all of the synapses, the ends of the nerves, meet to connect to the next chunk, the next pathway. All right. So preganglionic, this goes from the spinal cord to wherever the ganglion is. Postganglionic is from the ganglion to whatever the target organ, whatever the affected area is going to be. And sympathetic versus parasympathetic have very specific traits when it comes to these things. So the sympathetic neurons, the preganglionic sympathetic neurons, are very, very short. It goes from the spinal cord into the sympathetic chain ganglion. If we think back to our anatomy section, the sympathetic chain ganglion is this group of ganglion that are actually literally located right along the vertebral bodies. So as soon as we exit outside of the spinal cord, those are our ganglion for the sympathetic nervous system. And then that was where it synapses to the postganglionic sympathetic neuron, and those are longer ones that go all the way to the organ systems. The parasympathetic nervous system is flipped. It's the opposite. Okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system have long preganglionic nerve fibers, and they actually go all the way to the organs that they're targeting. And the ganglion for the parasympathetic nervous system is located either right outside of or actually inside of the different organ tissues. So then they have a very short postganglionic parasympathetic neuron. This is just a little chart of some of the general traits, general characteristics of sympathetic versus parasympathetic effect. Sympathetic increases heart rate and contractility. We get bronchodilation, decreased motility and secretions in the GI tract, pupil dilation, relaxing of the detrusor muscle and contracting of the sphincter to help with urination. To prevent urination. and then constricting the blood of the skin and dilating the blood vessels of the muscle. The parasympathetic is kind of the opposite effects of all of those. A big key component when we talk about the autonomic nervous system is the adrenal medulla. Okay, this is one of those kind of the little exceptions where this is more of kind of this is an in between a neuron type structure and a hormone type structure, all right, an endocrine structure. So it's kind of a mix of, we call it a neuroendocrine structure because it's mixed. It's a modified sympathetic ganglion. So preganglionic neurons actually go from the spinal cord and enter into the adrenal medulla, which stimulate these cells called chromaffin cells. Chromaffin cells are some of the few cells that produce and release epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream. So this is where we kind of get norepinephrine and epinephrine acting as a hormone rather than just a neurotransmitter. So, and this is a pretty big exception. So they like to ask about the adrenal medulla, specifically, the layers of the medulla and cortex, the job of the adrenal medulla, pathologies of the adrenal medulla, and the development of the adrenal medulla, which is covered in the spinal anatomy section. We dive into, there's a specific chart covering the development that I have big, bolded, highlighted because lots and lots of important stuff happen with the development of all this stuff. Reflex arcs that involve the autonomic nervous system. Most of this is just kind of keyword association, understanding, knowing which ones what these are, that these are reflex arcs. Baroreceptor reflex for blood pressure regulation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Micturition reflex. Micturition means urination, so it's the bladder control. And then pupillary light reflex, causing parasympathetic constriction through our cranial nerve 3. With higher cortical function and the special senses, again, all of those are covered fully in the spinal anatomy, so we're not going to go over them again here. So if you feel like you need a refresher of those, and again, this is where I'm going to reiterate again, the spinal anatomy course and the spinal anatomy playlist is one of your best friends. It is definitely going to be a huge chunk of this material. All right. We'll continue in the next chunk, starting getting into the muscle physiology.